Good evening and welcome to the June 18th meeting of the Master Plan Implementation Committee. We have a focused agenda for tonight and to get started, Jonathan, could you lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The first thing I'd like to do is go off the agenda as listed just very slightly and mark the occasion of, it's a milestone. I'm on one hand very sorry to say that Anna Houston, who has been a member from its founding, will be leaving after this meeting. However, we can count on her to continue her input, her criticisms, and her support as a member of the planning board. And it solidifies, has always solidified our connection with the planning board. And given the contributions she's made, including the knowledge and articulation of various ways in which the housing issues in this town can be approached, she's proven to be an incredible asset, not just for us, but for the town in general. The planning board is very lucky to have her on board. Thank you very much for what you've done for us. We will also be losing, unless the Board of Selectmen, in their infinite wisdom.
I haven't taken it up yet, but it's possible.
I said decides that they're going to, I have no idea what Chase's fate will be, but he's certainly more than welcome to return because we do need a very firm voice. Plus the fact, I do appreciate the fact that he's heavily involved, in fact, providing a fair amount of direction as part of a, I have to say, a relay team dealing with the sewering that will have profound effects not only on the common but significant positive effects on the town. So it's very important that we keep that relationship going, and having Chase along with us, I think, is the best way to do it. So thank you for what you've done so far, and we're going to expect a lot more in the
Yes,
future.
more to do.
Okay. So I'd like to return now to the first item on the agenda, which is entitled "The Preparation and Drafting of Update on Progress of Implementing the Master Plan." What this has to do with is communicating with the town, in particular, about the progress being made on the various programs and aims that were contained in the master plan and are now underway. And I'd like to have a discussion about not just the value of having this communication, but what that communication should accomplish, how best to do that in terms of actually draft language. I, Chairman, would like to see consistency in the messages provided, regardless of the media chosen. And that's the other point: which media do we want to use and how best to use it? But I want to make very, very clear that our purpose here is to promote the master plan for the town, and not necessarily to make a judgment call within the context of making the bringing people up to date, how well or how poorly they're doing in implementing. That's a different issue entirely. That has to do with guidance, and we have to have a separate discussion among ourselves at this meeting to start about that topic. At the moment, what I'd like to do is focus on getting on the ground, starting the drafting of the whatever materials we've decided are necessary to provide, basically promote the master plan, including the projects that are, most importantly, the projects that are in flight. So given the fact that implementing the master plan is part of one of the goals of the selectmen, I'd like to get some input, starting with you, Chase, about, based on, from your perspective, A, do you think it's worthwhile for this committee to undertake the task of spreading the word, reporting and celebrating what's going on? And number two, what you feel might work in terms of how often, what the message should contain, content, basically.
Can I answer a third question?
Sure. You can, yeah, formulate.
A third unasked question, which is, I guess, how, and maybe it's rolled into those, how can we do it better? And I particularly look at the fits and starts we've seen with the sewer and where communication has gone well, it's been well received, and where communication has been poor, it's been exceedingly poorly received. And I think part of that is the lack of not just consistency, but the lack of harmonized message between take the revitalization of the common question. Revitalizing the economic interests, the sewer aspects, the environmental components, everything is, our goal as a committee is to really address those things holistically, and we've helped. It would be worse without this group. It's still pretty poor, and I think that has really hampered certain projects, not just the sewer, but I think the development work out on Taylor Street could also suffer from that same sort of compartmentalization. And I think that's where we need to grow. Are we ready to? I don't know if we're ready to report on a regular basis. I don't know what that looks like.
Let me put you on the spot. Let's say that we did want to, let's put it under the title, for argument's sake, revitalization of the common, and make the sewer part of that, which is what I think this committee looks at it as. You think it's too early or you think it's too early in terms to approach the public with the message, or you think that I know we're not in shape yet enough to do it. The question is the public being overwhelmed or disinterested or some combination of all of the above?
Here's what I can't figure out. If we go to the public and present things too early and they're not well formed, we get kicked in the knees because it's a half-baked idea. If we show up too late, it's preordained. I honestly don't know where the right balance is there. I don't think we've struck that yet. I think this group, the planning board, the board of selectmen, have all been accused at various points in time of being to one extreme or the other, and maybe that's an indication that maybe if you average it out, we're about right. But there's definitely those two poles.
This is probably too simplistic, but is part of the problem that the public does not actually see anything happening on the common, just and physically occurring?
But what?
And we don't have to answer that.
Yeah, I guess that's a hard thing, though. What would something happening look like?
That one of the property owners makes it very clear physically, whether they put flags up, signs up, pictures up, whatever, of this is the future home of Acme's, nuts and bolts, or whatever it is that they're going to do. I mean, I'm just talking about anticipation of physical evidence of change.
And that's actually one of the things I wanted to bring up tonight. It's almost like we coordinated this, is that I know of some property owners on the common who have spec drawings, who have concept drawings, who have concept plans that they're not ready to share with the public yet. And yet, I think the public would really be very interested in seeing them, but their fear is similar to what I just articulated about too early, too late. They don't want to get locked into this very early conceptual idea.
Okay.
And nonetheless, it would help the public understand what the options in front of them are where the common is concerned, but I think that's equally true of other projects.
Yeah, I just
Common's
use the
a
common as
useful
I'm sorry, Jonathan, please.
Would it be worthwhile, let me step back a second. I mean, when we talked about the what would happen if if the new zoning is adopted, that it would still take many years before a lot of things would happen. Maybe, what Chase just said, maybe it wouldn't take so many years.
I think some would go right, right on the gate.
That it might. I'm wondering if some of the things that we've envisaged for the common couldn't be done, or we couldn't think about trying to do some of them, that some of them are public activities, and that we couldn't think of doing a few of those earlier or right away to give people a sense that something is actually happening. I'm thinking of things like streetscapes. One thing, I guess is sort of underway, but as with all these things, goes very slowly, is the town ownership of the house at 12 Robinson Road, and if something could be done even there to make it sort of look better, but I think they are sort of underway to sort of working on that. That I think might give people a sense, here it's already starting to look a little bit more like what we'd like it to look like. Some of those streetscape things that were in the roadmap that we saw, and those are not.
In other words, actually have models in the common on a specified day, say, come see.
Well, no, I was thinking of actually doing some of those things.
Doing some.
Not just having models, but actually few of them even sort of doing something so that it would give a sense that actually things are moving along. I'm just sort of throwing that out. I'm sure somebody, I'm sure there are lots of objections that'll be raised and so on, but I just think that's something that might help people see things a little bit better.
Mike?
I think I think Chase brings up some interesting points, but I think we need to be very careful, we being the MPIC, but we also being people that are involved in other aspects and other boards and committees. We need to be careful that we avoid being impatient and we avoid being frustrated. Some of the things that the master plan is suggesting would be good for the town are by definition difficult, complex, and are going to take a lot of time to pass, and it's going to go in fits and starts and ebbs and flows. It's inevitable. It's just part of the process. And when we get to the ebb, I don't think we should all of a sudden stop and panic's not a good word, but overreact to that and start making short-term decisions just because we've reached an ebb. I think that the Board of Selectmen, the Planning Board, there are people that have been involved. We're supported by professional staff. We're going to be able to get to a vote. There's no question in my mind that we'll get to a vote on these different issues. Whether or not the town supports the vision being put forth in front of them at that particular moment in time, that's always up for right. That's the roll of the dice. We never really know. For us, it seems like there's consensus because we went through the master plan update process, and we felt the consensus in the room at the time, but that was before price tags were put on it and impacts and details were talked about, traffic, parking, all these kinds of different things. And I just want us to make sure that we're okay with the fact that it's going to take a while. We shouldn't be the ones getting impatient and frustrated. I feel like, yes, there are always going to be people that say you move too fast, and there are always going to be people that say you've done this, opaquely, and it's a preordained outcome. That's not true. It's never true. It's just their perception of how it goes, because they tune in when they need to, when it becomes relevant to them, and then they tune out because they're busy. I'm not. That's fine. That's inevitable. But I think we just need to keep working the process. And as this group, I'm not worried about outcomes with this group. I feel like our goal with this group is to keep making sure, checking in with the various boards, that they're either working the process, updating us on, are they in an ebb or a flow, or that, no, we're not doing it anymore, here's why. Okay, we're gonna update the master plan. This one is now dormant because of these reasons. The outcomes are with the Board of Selectmen, with the Planning Board, with the Historical Commission, with the Conservation Commission, whichever particular item is associated with those boards or, in combination, as it so often can be. So I think that having this idea of how are we going to, what's our process, and I think you're right, Mike, consistency of the message and consistency of the deliverable is important, especially over time, because we're not all going to be here. As you already said, Ann is leaving. Chase, he's got one foot out the door. Look at him. I mean, I'm only kidding. So trying to come up with a framework that we're all going to be able to pass on to the next generation, I think is important. I don't have a lot of answers to that, or suggestions to that. I think that's going to be an iterative process, but I think now's a good time to start it.
Thanks. Wow.
What this makes me think of is in architecture, there's always incremental advances. So working with homeowners, it's a matter of how much unfinished business can you live with. So with the town as a whole homeowner to all of this, how much unfinished business can we live with? It depends on the vision of where we're heading and grasp of the path to get there. So I imagine that ends up being our task, and I imagine there has to be enough consistency of who's on the board to keep these points moving forward. So however we ordain that, it's our job to know what we're doing as a group that evolves over time, and as we communicate that to the town, since we are in fact talking about decades, not weeks and months.
Oh, no. Anna.
Well, to answer the question about should Mpic report and celebrate, I think it is the responsibility of Mpic to be able to report, because this group is the one that has the purview of what's going on across all the different recommendations with the different boards, with the different committees. And as such, should be able to look at the 67 recommendations and identify where's the focus, and not Mpic's focus, but where's the focus that the town has, and then be able to identify where is the town on all of these various recommendations. The ones that I think are a little bit different are the ones that haven't necessarily had a home in the past, and we have talked about that, like the common. No one particular group had that, so I think in that sense, this group had more hands-on versus a lot of the other work that's going on. But the reporting is for a couple of different reasons. First, because we owe it to the town to give an update as to what's currently going on, because in some cases, that information is very spotty, if it's available at all. And then also because we said we would. So in another 10 years, when another master plan group gets together and decides to look at the following 10, 15 years, they're going to look back and say, well, what did they do? And if there's nothing to show for it, so to speak, in terms of just documenting and reporting what we've done, who knows what's going to be said about the work that's been done by this master plan implementation team and the prior update steering committee team. So it's in our best interest to be able to report. The celebrating part, I think, is huge. I think that regardless of the particular recommendation, I think it is important for the town to be able to have as part of a celebration, whatever that time frame is, to be able to talk about these are all the things that we as volunteers of the town have accomplished along with our staff. And it's important to do that, whether it's incremental little steps, but at least then we can take a reflection to say, this is what we've done over the last year. Wow, we still have a lot to do on this project, but look at how far we advanced on this other one for the last year. So I think those kind of opportunities are ones that we can actually help to create. It doesn't have to be big. It can be, a page. It can be 20 minutes somewhere at some meeting or something. But I think it's important for the town to feel good, because we are all volunteers making these changes for our town. agree with what Mike Fontanella said about being patient and about, checking in. Because ultimately, the majority of the work is done by all of the other boards, except for those orphan projects.
Let's see if we can bridge some gaps, if the gaps are bridgeable. If we had to do a report, it seems to me we would focus at least on the 7 items that the master plan, this committee identified as top priority, and because they needed long lead times and all the rest. If we started with those 7 and had to report, not necessarily immediately on all 7, but do it incrementally through the next, I'll call it several months, without putting a timeline on it. Going through basic general statements about where things are today and why, and the significance of it to the extent that it can be put out. I mean, the comment is, sewer and zoning and private property owners. There's about 8 or 9 little pieces, lots of moving pieces. So that one would be difficult to nail down, except for maybe 1 or 2 things like zoning, and maybe if we're comfortable with it and think it's a worthwhile thing to do and won't press the wrong buttons, talk about what the significance of the sewering is in the context, and then stop right there. That's where we are. And if we did that and then move to the next one, which is, I'll just use the total rubric, housing. Is there a sense here that there's enough going on about the various efforts in housing, ranging from affordable to looking at the zoning regulations that exist and see if they can be further tuned to get what the town wants? Is there enough activity in that very big, vast area of housing, regardless of where it goes on? Is there enough there to report? I'm looking at the planning board only because that seems,
Well, yes, I mean, in the last 2 years, the town has approved the Affordable Housing Trust inclusionary bylaw, 2 iterations of the Senior Residential Development bylaw. So those, again, are all accomplishments.
And also, we could talk, are there not already shovels, as it were, in the ground? Okay, so there's one we could always put at the top because that's physically occurring, in contrast to the common, which is still, we're waiting.
But I disagree with you. In fact, I would disagree that we have not done enough to promote the fact that the roadmap was
Yes.
done over the last year, and that it was completed, and that the only place that anybody can find it is online. We haven't talked about it openly. We have been able to continue on that project, so being able to identify, this is all the work that went behind it, and in a nutshell, in a paragraph, this is what it means for the town.
Mm-hmm.
So when I speak of reporting, I'm talking about a couple of bullets, not this again.
Oh, no, agree.
So what if, rather than report on our 7 priorities,
Mm-hmm.
we follow the master plan structure of land use, transportation, economic development, and to the extent that, one of our higher priorities fits, or multiple ones fit within the,
Oh, yeah.
a 1-page cut sheet on, okay, here's what we've done for the last year with respect to land use, or maybe haven't done, things that we've deliberately chosen to, we as a town have deliberately chosen to wait on.
So you're speaking now to how the reporting or how the celebration would occur with these larger topics. Okay.
Rather than focus on the common is part of
No,
the economic development
Yeah.
story,
Yeah.
right?
Well, yeah, I agree. I have personally agreed. Do we want to start another round to see if, what the sense is? I have to ask Maren this because she's been through several campaigns. Maybe not master plan campaigns, but campaigns. Do you think the suggestions made makes sense, that makes sense, but would the town, in your view, find it useful?
Yes, I think so.
Would it give it coherence and begin breaking down some of the, what do you call that? The barriers between the various parts by organizing it that way?
Right, well, now you're talking about format, which is
Yeah,
a good thing. I think
it's also thinking about it, yeah.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to move forward with the, with the celebration of this is what we've accomplished. How it's laid out is a much simpler decision.
Okay.
And again, the accomplishment is the town.
It's the town, it's not ours, it doesn't have to be ours.
Right.
And I don't want to, we just annoy people. Anyway,
I guess I'm trying to imagine where this would happen any place other than town meeting where we all get together. I mean, I would see a benefit to all of the different boards and committees coming together to share what we've done, but
That's a great idea.
who would show up for that other than us, and how do we get that word out? So, at least a few minutes in town meeting to say what has taken place, because at least we get hundreds of people there.
that would be, I'd say, a piece of it. I'm thinking frankly of newspaper, online, and basically beginning to use the media that's available to us. And that, to me, is part of the, natural part of the process.
Yep.
And I want to take a page out of your suggestion. Part of our patience would be, we don't have to keep drumming at it. I think we should just do it in scheduled thrusts,
Mhm.
well spaced in time.
Oh, so you're saying maybe one discussion of housing, and then the next month we talk about a discussion of.
That's one approach.
economic development or-
The other thing to do is maybe to, take two, something, I mean, I don't want to wait for the board. I think we should decide the best strategy forward. And also, I have to also move ahead and think about, this is very easy to say, how it takes us, but it takes a certain skill, to be blunt, in being able to bring up a very, sometimes dense, difficult, and complex subject, such as land use, under one heading and nail it nicely. So who gets to do the work is part of it. But at the moment, I want to make sure that we're agreed, or we're supporting the notion of doing this. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Were we, no, I mean, I seem to recall having recently got an email from the Board of Selectmen saying that we're supposed to be doing this. That we're supposed to be giving them some update on what we've accomplished.
Yes, but
Is that
given
not?
the selectmen are the selectmen. They get updates, I can assure you, they get updates routinely, whether they want them or not,
Oh.
okay? And the planning board gets to hear it. In fact, the planning board is right in the middle of stuff. I mean, they're part of this. It's not the planning board and selectmen that, at least from my perspective, that we ought to be reaching. It's basically the town. Especially, I can't help but notice that when one reaches out to non-resident property owners and say, are you aware, or I want you to let you know this is going on in town. Yes, I heard that. I'd like to have more material. I will invariably get something back from them later telling me that they received it, thanks, it really changed, or it got juices going. That's hardly a test, that's an anecdote. But I think it's worthwhile to reach out to the public, residents especially, stakeholders that go beyond, because a lot of committees that are not named so far here are not doing very much. And they could, just by talking about the subject and basically taking a look at it and suggesting what they could do. And even though suggestions have been put in front of them, I think the response has been, shall we say, less than active. And a lot more has fallen on the other volunteer, the two big volunteer organizations, the planning board and the board of selectmen. I mean, the only board that I can think of at the moment that became very active and continues to be very active, for example, and very focused on a particular aspect of land use and whatever, is the Council on Aging, which has been busy. And the planning board has been almost full bore out and covering the topics they could. So before we get too far along,
I think there is an aspect to this that is formalized in terms of wanting to have a report, we'll call that a formal report to the planning board and to the select board. And that should happen at a specific interval every year, regardless of what you do on the side, but it should happen publicly. And then any other type of report, if you will, via the more general media or internet regarding a brief, maybe instead of calling it a report, it's just a brief, and these are some things to celebrate. That's, I mean, I do think that they're two different things.
Yeah, I agree. I'm more interested in the latter than I am, not disinterested in the former, because the former actually is going. I do go up in front of the boards and do report
Well,
what's going on. Maybe not to your satisfaction, but
Right.
to theirs, okay? So that they're with.
well, I am on the board, so.
Well, you haven't been there for one of those, okay? So my question.
Actually, no, that's not accurate.
Anyway, we are at the position now where I think it's appropriate for us to get started on, at least try to get started. Do we want to continue this discussion, or do we have enough here to begin making assignments and asking particular people to take on the task of, let's put it this way, writing what I would call the celebratory to the residents and other stakeholders portion of this?
I don't like the idea, the celebratory aspect. Makes me uncomfortable because it has a sense of completion to it that
Oh.
I think is probably, this is a big ongoing process, and we decided to chunk off the biggest and gnarliest things first. So the idea that we're making progress on these is good. How we celebrate that, though,
Yeah.
So maybe celebrating is the wrong word. Maybe the fact that so many people take their personal time, you included as a select board member, to work on these topics, hour after hour, week after week throughout the years, right? That's great. And
Oh, I
the
thi- I
fact that
think
we
that's-
do all that work, so how do we, I mean, what else does the town do to acknowledge all the work that's been done?
I mean, I would use the term raise awareness. I think that's what
Yeah.
we're striving to do,
Yeah.
is to try to raise awareness and engender, community input and appreciation for the fact that there are a lot of things that are being worked on, and, the town is moving forward. And, I would caution that every board has tried to do some of this, and the reason that they're not doing more is because for everything they do, it doesn't really change the situation on the ground. People are going to pay attention when they want to pay attention, and when they don't want to pay attention, it doesn't matter how good your messaging is, they're not going to pay attention. The vast majority of them, that's just the way it is. When you talk about newspapers, there are no newspapers anymore relative to Littleton. There just aren't. There's no newspaper that truly covers Littleton. I mean, I was looking at what used to be the Littleton paper.
Yeah.
I mean, now it's the Chelmsford, Westford, Littleton. Where are we in that pecking order? They may as well take our name off the banner. It's ridiculous. I mean, but that's
Even before we were born
it's
in
true.
that day,
It's
we weren't
just
really
exactly,
covering.
and that's just unfortunate. And it's nobody's
Cover our
certainly not their fault, but the people that are ostensibly still striving to try. My point is that we should do it. We should try, but I'm just trying to temper the expectations that the impact is going to be anywhere near meaningful in terms of doing a better job or being more effective at it than other boards have been at. The other thing I worry about is rather than assigning a bunch of us to go off and try, I would say we should pick one and pick a couple of people to put together a template effort. And we should work that template until we're all satisfied, yeah, that's kind of what we were thinking about. And then once we have a template, then we can start to assign it out to the rest of us to use on other aspects of the master plan. That way, we have the best shot at being consistent. And I think by virtue of being consistent and timely, like Anna said, like if we know that there are certain anniversaries, whether they're annual, semi-annual, quarterly, whatever it is, and they know they're going to get this package, template, whatever, whether it's a summary followed by a more detailed report, and then people can pick and choose which, I'm a summary guy, I do the summary, and I'm a deeper dive guy, I do the deeper dive, then I think we can start to be effective. And I would argue that this process that we're talking about, which is highly necessary, and I don't think we should have been doing it before. I think we needed to get through the first year or more of, and like Chase said, we've picked off the most difficult, gnarliest thing, so there was nothing to really report on. We're getting closer to having some progress or measurement of where these things are going to go. So I think this is the right time to bring the template together and figure out what our strategy is. But I would definitely want to make sure we know that we've agreed this is how we want to do it. One or two things, and then once we're comfortable, we'll spread it out.
Okay. So the topics, as I understand it, would be among the broad ones that are the topics that are contained in the master plan?
Well, I'm thinking specifically, yes, definitely, that's definitely got to be true.
Okay.
But there are particular projects that we've been focusing our energy on, and other boards have been focusing on. I would pick maybe one or two of those to say, well, how would we report out on that? Well, how are we going to present, to the community what our interpretation of the situation is? And that's what I mean by template.
Okay, got it, okay. So maybe worthwhile, we can pick those two or select those two?
Absolutely, yep.
Okay. I'm going to start at this end for a change. Which two do you think would be a good place to start?
I'll begin by saying I think that's a great idea, Mike, because when I got to Economic Development Committee, I wasn't sure what my job was other than to listen. And then when asked to speak, I had to think about what I had to say.
Yeah.
So having a template for what we should share is a good thing.
Good.
So the two biggest ones that I can think of are helping see that, sewering and form-based code seem to be headed in the same direction to me. So then the other end of the town, the train station, maybe that's just because I finished the survey tonight, but
Thank you for doing the survey.
you're welcome.
Okay. I think the classification, or the groupings that we were talking about fell under big topics, like there's certain ones that could fall under the rubric of land use. That would be both housing and
Okay.
open space, and that would incorporate aspects of the common, aspects of the depot, and the rather large box of stuff, material that Anna referred to earlier.
Sure.
I'm just wondering, is that what you were?
I'm more of a consensus summarizing guy anyway, so I'll wave my flag when the group agrees.
So earlier.
Can you remind me again, Mike, what is exactly we're looking for here?
Okay, there are in the text of the master plan, what we'll call, not in the foldouts, but earlier on, there are groupings. I don't know if they're always formally presented, but they fall under things such as land use, which covers, you could argue covers housing. I mean, we're doing some of this for convenience, housing.
So there are.
Yeah.
The goals that are established by section. One of the things that we did intentionally to not create silos so that we're only talking about land use or that we're only talking about natural resources is we have strategies and themes. And so perhaps that would be another way to approach it. The strategies and themes include Littleton Common, planned growth. So that would talk about some of the zoning, Great Road, Taylor Foster. So if we look at it from the strategies or themes that are already preordained in here for us, that would be one way to do it. Community health and well-being, equitable development, legacy. So depending on what the group would want to focus on. That would be another way to approach it, if that's what we want to do.
Well, that's what we're trying to decide. Are these classifications useful for us to use as a template?
I quite like Anna's idea of using the strategies and themes. I think it's better than significantly better than what I had suggested, because it does break down those silos.
Yeah. Yeah.
My fear was that what I don't want us to be is the proponents of specific projects.
Yes. All we're doing here is saying, this is going on, this is where things are.
And grouping our reports on that strategies and themes basis,
Yeah.
I think takes us even a step further away from being proponents of specific projects.
Yep.
While also allowing us to talk more globally about issues and relate them together.
Mike?
I'm fine with that. I think that, I don't think there's any right or, there are a plethora of wrong answers. And, probably infinite wrong answers, but there's a few right answers, and I wouldn't get too hung up, because again, I feel that this will be an iterative process. So I think that the more important thing is to pick one and start down that road, and if we dead end, we'll know it when we get there, and we'll just fix it from there.
Okay.
Agreed.
Yep, I agree. And so, now the moment of truth about basically giving some meat to the template so we can start testing and moving on. Mike, how do you feel about doing I knew you knew this was coming, sort of.
It had, since grad school, I've always been the guy who wrote it. That's just what I did, so I'm happy to participate.
Okay.
In the effort.
And would you like a compatriot to sort of?
I absolutely, I can't. I wouldn't be comfortable doing it unilaterally.
Okay. I'm looking at Chase because it's part of, I'm pretty sure this is going to enter into the thinking of the Board of Selectmen anyway.
I think that's a good pair.
So that's a good pairing, okay. So I'll assign that task to the two of you, and let's give you a comfortable period of time to get something done using.
Can I ask a couple more sort of guidance type questions of this
Sure.
committee? In terms of what we're putting together, give us a sense of, maybe these are related, length and level of detail. Are we looking for a one-page cut sheet that really highlights what we've done with respect to each of these strategies and themes? Are we looking for something more substantial and more in-depth,
That's all I'm looking for.
a one-page cut sheet?
Yeah, I think a one-page cut sheet, because that one-page cut sheet could be a platform for a consistent, in-depth plunging in. So I think that it'd be more valuable. Also, I think it's going to be pretty testing it's going to be a real test to distill some of this in a coherent fashion. It's not an easy task.
No. More useful for disseminating.
Yeah, and by the way, if you find yourself either individually or collectively going in deeper, just keep your notes, because they're going to turn out to be useful for the next step.
Yeah,
I mean, I wouldn't worry about the actual length, 1 page versus 2 page versus.
Yeah.
I think that the idea is a cut, right? Not the deep dive. That's enough direction for me to say, okay, because some topics will be a page or 2 paragraphs. Others, by definition, are going to have to be 3 pages because they're so broad or complex or intertwined with other things that
Or we
to
just
set the
wanna make it more
context.
aesthetically pleasing
Yeah,
for
exactly. To
various
set the
sections.
context properly is just going to take a little bit more than,
Mhm.
and I'm not going to get hung up on that I bleed out
Yeah.
onto the next page.
Did-
Say,
did-
damn, what do I got to cut out? I
Yeah,
can't do it.
get that page break in there.
Exactly.
And I
Yeah.
think one of the things that the previous committee did to create something that was usable is the 67 recommendations. The very first column is the strategy
Yeah,
thing.
yep,
So
yep.
even though they might not necessarily seem like they go together, they're already all
Yep.
They're
chucked out.
There are a bunch of, and the text also does a good job. If you go back and look, it does a great job of pulling stuff together. In that sense, it was well done. Yep.
What is the implementation committee's sense of a brief discussion of headwinds where, certain strategies are concerned? Challenges that we have, that we collectively as a community are going to have to complete these things?
I'm on autopilot. The answer to, as far as I can see, is the case, but I think before we deal with headwinds directly, I think we ought to give you a chance to get the template out so we can identify the nature of those templates.
I mean, I appreciate the I think that's sort of a counter question to, well, we don't want to be cheerleaders, but we also don't want to rain on everybody's parade. But if we don't do either, we may as well not do anything.
Then we're not doing anything.
It's going to be so saccharine at that point as to be meaningless. So I think the goal is I think you're raising a good issue, and I think Mike's right. The goal is balance, right? That's always going to be the goal. Like, how do we strike the balance? And then doing the work is where we're going to find out if we, and that's why, we'll make a pass, but then it's going to be, it has to be discussed amongst the rest of us in order to make sure that our definition of balance meets everybody else's definition of balance. And then the feedback that we get from the Board of Selectmen, the Planning Board, and the community will help us realize, well, we're not as balanced as we thought we were, So I guess we got to
Well, that's just it. I
try.
mean, going through this on a periodic basis will actually allow the committee to see, so we haven't really focused in on this particular strategy, and so how are we going to make that a little bit more prominent in the next year, as an example?
Before you give me timelines, if you haven't met, please introduce yourself.
Hi, Nina Nazarian, your new town administrator, and if you don't mind, I'll just say hello very quickly to those I haven't met yet.
Hi, John
Hi.
Leibowitz. I mean, you see our
Yes,
names.
thank
but,
you very much, yes.
Nice to meet you.
Same
Very
here.
pleased that you're.
You know him?
Oh, yes, I believe I am familiar with.
We spent a couple minutes together.
By the way, I'm also on the Historical Commission. Somebody was going to get in touch with you about maybe meeting with us at some point.
Jonathan?
Yes.
Have they done that?
Jonathan? You know how we feel. No, it's easy, all right?
I'd be glad to, thank you.
Okay, so we'll
Oh, I'm
talk about
probably
that again.
one of the first 5 people that met Nina in
And we
Littleton.
had the chance to meet
Nice.
briefly,
Yes,
right? But,
yeah.
and we've met.
Good to see you.
Hi, Nina Nazarian, nice to meet you, Lana.
And you couldn't have arrived at a more propitious time.
Perfect.
Okay. Timeline. I'm looking at the two of you. What do you feel, given your other life's work, what do you feel is a reasonable time for you to produce a draft that could challenge and put the rest of us on edge?
When's fall town meeting?
It's,
Late October.
yes, yep.
So, I mean, I would say like maybe a month before that, right? Because I'm not saying that we would present it at town meeting,
Right.
but I don't know, town meeting, the fall town meeting and the spring town meeting are 2 particular events that a lot of activity in town gets centered around.
You want to try and shorten it up, summer's easier for me than.
Oh, I want to do work on it before that, but I just want enough time because, because it is summer. I'm not going to be doing this 5 days a week between now and Labor Day. Or every week between now and Labor
I guess
Day.
what I had in mind, I was trying to get some release of information, however terse and concise it might be, in advance, in other words, during the course of the late summer, early fall, before the town meeting. In other words, I'm
Right.
trying to get out there, whether it's video, whatever
Well,
media we
why
use.
don't we try for Labor Day?
Okay.
Because to me, the school starts again and people are
Yep.
coming back from vacation and
Mhm.
the community is less dispersed and more ready to be a receptor of that kind of messaging.
So asking you to come up with your first draft by 2 meetings from now for us is too early?
What's 2 meetings from now?
That would be
Mid-August.
August.
Are we talking a draft of every single strategy or just one strategy? I want to clarify what your deadline. I was
Right.
thinking of it. I was trying to get respond to your notion that you wanted to have the rest of us, as it were, which I think is a great idea, not weigh in, but basically pick up the cudgels and say, okay, this makes sense, keep going, or not. And only pick, and
Right.
only pick, and the picking of the
So-
strategy, I wasn't thinking
Right.
of doing all the strategies.
Right. And to answer Anna's question, I would probably pick, I don't know, we would pick a couple. I don't think one's enough, but, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we get one that we're really happy with
Right.
and one that we think is, you know, if we
Little
can give
more
you
tricky.
an A and
Yeah.
and a B minus, you know, I think that would be ideal.
Okay, so, yeah.
And I would push to, let's try to deliver that at our September meeting. That'll give us July, August, and some of September to do it.
Okay. And we can get updates from you while you're in flight. All right.
Well, we have to be in contact with the chair. We
Sure.
can't do this in a vacuum.
Wait.
You'll know.
Oh, yeah.
Fella.
Always good to know. And I'll spread the good news around.
There you go.
All right, so be it. Is there any objection that we proceed this way? Anna?
Sounds great.
Jonathan? Okay.
People are willing
You're
to
launched.
do this.
You're
I'm
launched.
fine with that.
Okay. So the next topic is, this is separate now from, completely separate. This is the assessment of the ongoing tasks and programs by relevant committees. And I'll give you a recount of my adventure with this when we're done, if we want to proceed on this particular topic. And now what we have to talk about more directly is what are the various committees doing or not doing? How are they doing it in order to achieve the objectives of the master plan, as well as an assessment of what's going forward? And I believe in this particular case, I think it's obvious without banging too hard that the town administrator plays a very significant role in this piece. Even though there's no committee, it's still, you know, the face of the town. You're it, as it were, for a lot of this. I'm going to start with probably what I consider to be, I'll use my role as chair to be, shall we say, the scold in the group. I took the exercise almost that you did. I picked up the master plan and started looking at the columns to basically get started for this some time ago. And I went through the columns and I noticed that, not noticed, but I was reminded from the experience on the steering committee, which I carried forward here, that there were two columns that were particularly troubling. And one of the columns was who was supposed to do it, who was supposed to do each of the various 67, and then that ambiguous column of cost, filled with dollar signs or not dollar signs. All understandable why there was no mention of this, why there was very little specificity given. Very obvious why. And this led, I'll just cut it quick, is that there is one topic that's implied in the entire master plan that is not explicitly mentioned. Maybe it's so obvious, and that is the human and financial resources are given that needed to accomplish the plan without compromising and sustaining the ongoing activities of the town is not explicitly laid out or mentioned in the master plan itself. Yet it's implied everywhere by having those columns. And it's the resources, both human and financial, that that should concern us all, not because the estimates of the various projects aren't known. The question is, and I'm being influenced by some ancient writings that go back to the 60s or 70s, called The Limits of Growth, which some of you may have heard of. It's a seminal piece of work. Its relevance now only because of its title, and that is, what is Littleton's capacity and how can we improve it in order to achieve the various goals of the master plan? And I don't mean to fill up the column, but I'm talking here about the efforts on the part of the selectmen I guess, on whom most of this falls, FinCom, and the committees devoted to what I would call, broadly speaking, economic development, and quite directly, housing. And I'm not saying housing should be, this is where the resources, I'm leaving out the school, I'm leaving out a whole bunch of other ones, but these are the ones that when you look at the master plan, you can see they have, quite justifiably, a lot of the committees and a lot of the dollars involved. So if we're going to do an assessment, I think at this point, it's not only how well or not how well are we doing with the major strategic areas, but also there's the elephant in the room is the resources. What is the capacity of the town to do these things, and what would the town have to do to achieve these goals? How realistic is the cost benefit there? What was particularly striking to me is the presentation presented having to do with Taylor and Russell Street, where we heard a very interesting talk and presentation made by MassDOT about where they thought the rail system was heading and the role that Littleton was going to play in it, and their timeline. Just to refresh your memory, it's 20 years. That was followed separately by a report of what the town may want to do in the Taylor Street area near the depot. But you would never know that of the timeline, the dollars, the infrastructure, you would never know from either one of those directly that there's an issue of not just resources, but also can these be coordinated? It was the lack of coordination that was really striking. Now, I'm not putting this on the planning board, this is not MassDOT, it's not a person. This has to do with an approach. It has to do with how Littleton does its business.
Why would you think it would have anything to do with the planning board? I'm sorry.
No, directly. In other words, I'm not going to hold the planning board responsible for the fact that there was a disconnect between the consultant trying to provide input about the railroad area and what MassDOT is up to, and their timelines and basically their view. They were completely unconnected. They did not connect. Prior to, there was no sense of relationship between the two. It's not like this is secret. There's already a depot there. Okay? There are things there. Not much, but there are things there. So I'm not trying to pick on this. This is sort of like a symptom. And the other interesting thing also is the presentation of budget in town. I want to stop after this, because if you go through the master plan, you'll see it. And I'm not talking here, I'm specifically mentioning that I do understand clearly that when you go to town meeting, there's a certain order in which the budget must be presented. And that's formal and perfectly intelligible and acceptable. However,
Perfectly intelligible.
well, if you follow the script, yes. I mean, in the sense that you sit there and squint, and you got it. The point is that the thinking that goes into it, the way it's approached, is that there is no differentiation between what we'll call real cost centers and investments being made by the town. They're treated as if they're all the same. They're thought about as if they're all the same. Not necessarily by the Board of Selectmen. I'm talking directly here about the FinCom's habit of basically following that trail. I have finished my scold. So those two columns for me represent, shall we say, one spectrum, one end of I think, one of the issues. And I'm very well...
Aside from the estimated cost, which is the other column?
Yeah, in other words...
Who's responsible?
You said two columns, I'm seeing.
Yeah, one is who is responsible
Oh,
for it?
okay.
Who is the committees and all
I
the
see,
rest.
okay,
You know,
yeah.
who's responsible for
Local
that?
government leadership.
And then, yeah, that's it. And then the other column is, you know, it's going to cost. And all I'm saying is that in most cases, the capacity of Littleton to achieve its goal through, how do we get the resources? Where do the resources come from? What do we have to do to get the resources to do some of these things? Is done episodically, not consistently. It's, to put it simply, we don't have economic development as a, however you want to call it, however you want to define it, we don't have that in this town.
Well, to push back on that idea, though, I mean, it may be a $50 million budget, but by the time Mike takes his bite out of it, you know, there's 20, 25 left, and of that 20 or 25 that's left, 23 of it is spoken for and allocated already, and has been allocated for years to ongoing things that we've already decided as a community are high priority events. So even queuing up something 5 years from now requires an investment in the budget today, or the money's just not going to be there 5 years down the road. I suppose we want additional professional staff to implement something on this. And so it's not as easy as simply saying, oh, we don't see we collectively in the community don't see the investment in pursuing some of these priorities. I think it goes both ways. The community doesn't see how, frankly, little flexibility there is in the overwhelming majority of the budget. And by the time we get down to it, there's really a small pool of money to be allocated to, I don't want to call these wants, but some of them are very needs, some of them are more wants, but they're somewhere on that spectrum. And there's not a lot there once we get done paying all the salaries and
Right.
pursuing what's already.
To me, you've articulated a different version of the problem, and that is,
But what I would argue is that the issues you raise, while perfectly valid, are not endemic to Littleton. You know what I mean? Like, that's the problem of public government, public finance, and I think that the point you're trying to make, that, well, we need to get more control and do more planning, the control is a little bit of an illusion. Because you talk about like the Mass DOT. Well, the Mass DOT is this sprawling bureaucratic entity of which Littleton is a participant, but we are a drop in the ocean of DOT priorities and concerns. You know, how much influence can we possibly have on the DOT relative to what's specific to us, but what to them is just, yeah, that's certainly something we think about. It because we wrote it down, we presented it to you. It's part of what we consider, but it's really just this overarching thing that we have to do. I mean, the struggles that you've cited are the struggles that a community will be going through until we're not a community anymore. And we can improve, but I don't see us solving it because, like Chase just said, our funding, we can control to a degree our tax revenue, local tax revenue. We have almost no control over local aid. Trying to cost these things out is worthwhile, but everybody would acknowledge that it's only an effort that is going to have some degree of accuracy, and it's going to be somewhere south of 70% accuracy,
oh, yeah, I
probably.
think you're being generous.
Well, yeah, you know, I mean, that's,
Yeah.
right, I am, I'm being overly optimistic. So, I mean, I'm not disputing your points. I don't know what the point is to making those points here tonight.
Well,
Because
I think
it's-
the place where we as an implementation committee can bring value, though, let's take the DOT example. We as a community have a finite amount of resources, right? I mean, how long did you spend knocking heads together to get a traffic light that still doesn't
Exactly.
really exist?
Yeah. Almost a decade.
Almost a decade.
Not exaggerating.
But where we can provide value to our community is by harnessing the message of multiple groups and organizations within town where there are overlapping priorities. So to bring this back to your original, discussion, the liaison and the tasks by relevant committees, one of the ways that we can solve some of those budgetary limitations is, we ultimately weren't able to do it with the DOT, the traffic light, but at least we got him to bless it, right? Is to bring to bear multiple committees who have a common interest where one master plan objective, and in particular where there is a funding source that isn't a dedicated town funding source, so that our state reps, so that our state administration, so that our regional planning organizations, et cetera, are at least aware of and moving forward on those. And that's where I think our communication with some of our supporting boards and communities, or committees, or maybe we should say it the other way around, the boards and committees that we're impaneled to support, could be significantly improved and really hit the bottom line in a budgetary sense. Because I don't think, we're not going to substantively change the amount of cash available in the budget to pursue priorities that are not the big hallmark things. Right? You talk about a senior center or a library, things like that, sure. Those I think we can set aside. But the incremental things, we need $100,000 to do this, we need $200,000 to do that. They don't always rate.
Right. Well, my point is that the committees that are charged with such responsibilities, and I point out just two of them, just examples, are not doing it.
I disagree.
Okay, good.
They're not doing it as well as you would like them to do it, but they're doing it. That's what they do. That's what we do. If we're not doing it to the level you would like us to see, it's because we are constrained mightily by forces beyond our control. It's just, that's true. I'm not saying we can't improve. We can definitely improve. But to your point, I would argue that why do you need the MPIC? You're on the Board of Selectmen. You have good ideas. And everything you just said, I don't disagree with a single one of them. Go do it. I do it with the school committee as best I can. The FinCom, we've got a new town administrator. Let's relook at how we work our way through the process with the goal of making what will inevitably only be incremental improvements. You will not get a exponential improvement unless the state strikes uranium or something along those
We hope
lines.
so.
Uranium's not big these days.
The market stuff
Whatever
for
it
that.
is.
The market stuff.
Exactly.
See, but,
Taking-
I'm sorry, Anna, go ahead.
Well, thank you. I was just going to say that number 59 is one that I think was one of our top 7. I believe that's the one. And that says establish mechanisms and policies that link the implementation of the master plan to annual work plans, budgets, and capital projects. So when I read that, initially, 2 years ago when we started this process, part of what that meant was we know that there are so many things in here that the town wants to accomplish over the next 10 years. And as you said, it's somewhere between a want and a need and somewhere in between. So how do we actually, as a town, plan for those things to the best of our ability? So I see it sort of like in a personal budget, you want to have a car in 2 years and you want to have a big down payment for a house in 5 years. So how do you incrementally save for that so that you can have those things that you want? So how can we as a town save, invest, do the appropriate things so that, let's say, one of these items is slated, let's say, for year 6 or 7, so that we know in year 6 or 7 that the town could potentially have enough to be able, resources to fulfill whatever that is. So that's what I see when I see 59, and in starting this process, that's sort of what I envisioned was, okay, gosh, how does the town even get through something like this? And maybe if we can help to kind of set out milestones where the town could have certain resources available, maybe then we could. And so that when folks or residents say, oh, well, guess we have to get in line in order to get our turn to get something. Well, you know what? Everybody wants something, and so, yeah, there is a bit of a queuing process, but there's reason behind it, there's rationale behind it. So that was my thought between what we had talked about originally as having that be one of the initial 7.
And, I mean, again, totally don't disagree with that. When we built the high school, the goal was to fund it inside the levy, and for several years prior to breaking ground, money was put aside in a stabilization fund in anticipation of paying the bond on the building of the high school. And we did it. I mean, that was planning, and we pulled it off, and we kept it inside the levy. Some would argue to the detriment of the town in other respects, but that was hashed out on town meeting floor several times, and as a community, we decided how we wanted to do it. We have, stabilization funds, we're earmarking money for certain capital projects. So again, a lot of that is happening, maybe not to the extent that we should be doing it, but more likely not to the extent that we truly can do it. Because unless we're willing to make hard decisions about, well, how many patrol officers do we need? How much of a staffing do we need for the fire department? What's our optimal classroom size for teacher-student ratios? And until we're willing to make those kinds of decisions, then we're going to be constrained, and we're not necessarily going to get in as ideal a situation for all of that planning as smart people would say, well, why didn't you do that? Why don't you do that?
And that right there is the almost untenable political situation. How do I say, I'm gonna put away $100,000 for a project 5 years from now, instead of hiring another teacher for
That's what happens.
this big bolus of kids that's
Right.
coming in.
November through April, that's what we're struggling with. Unfortunately, we struggle with it, and people don't truly pay attention, which is unfortunate. But those debates are being had on a regular basis in public session, and we crack heads.
But that's where I think I disagree with what you said a little bit earlier, Mike, about the importance of the master plan implementation committee. I think the Board of Selectmen, school committee, we do an okay job of handling those bigger things, but I think the value that the master plan implementation committee can have to our community is keeping the momentum on those very important but lower profile type things, like, a policy on, affordable housing improvement. That's not a sexy thing, right? But a lot of people have to touch it, and it needs a certain amount of momentum to keep going.
Relative to the master plan, absolutely agree 100%. I'm just cautious that we don't overstep our charter to where to the point where we're telling the Board of Selectmen how they need to be better governors of the town, or we're telling the FinCom how to be better fiscal stewards, because we just think we have good ideas about how the FinCom should be better fiscal stewards. If our ideas are relative and specific to the master plan, absolutely, let's do it. And I think you're right. I think we will bring value. And that was the whole goal of having the implementation committee, was to make sure that we were going to strive to bring that value relative to the master plan and not just let it sit on the shelf as it apparently did the last time when there wasn't an implementation committee.
Yeah, and I think the connection of different boards and committees is really something that we can try and pursue, and I think we have in some ways in things like the Common, which clearly needs that kind of connection, but I think there are other areas where we could do it as well. And I don't know if there's some way to get the town to sort of implement that more generally, or if that is just something that is going to be really hard to.
Well, that's where I was trying to head. And the reason I mentioned those two particular committees is because their response to what I would call the making even an incremental, as it were, effort to move things along. I'll just use that generalization, to move things along. There, as far as, and this is visible, there wasn't much going on. And I'm not saying they should they're giving up their time, they have other things to do. All these committees are volunteers, so it's asking a lot, but that touches on the issue of resources. of human resources being placed at the right places. And there's also the, shall we say, not totally unanticipated things, but there are times in which, when we're doing something positive, and the idea is to increase, among other things, revenues flowing to the town, it mysteriously also increases expense to the town. For example, the commercial center known as The Point, you can consider to be a reasonable success. It has generated funds for the town. At the same time, because of the traffic, I'll just use the capital T, not just cars, but people and everything else, it's putting greater pressure on the police department. They have to hire more people, which cuts right into the benefits that come out. So what I'm coming around, there are a lot of stuff that we try to do that cost N number of dollars. When we try to look at the benefit from it, sometimes it isn't a net win for us. And the habit of looking at that is, I don't think is widespread enough yet. And I don't want to make more of it than, I don't even have the last word, but that's where I'm heading.
Yeah, I mean, I would, and I don't want to necessarily have the last word either.
Sure you can, but you're so much.
I would argue that the idea that putting the point in, we knew that it would impact public safety. What we didn't necessarily know is our estimate may have been erroneous or not as accurate as we would like, because when you model, that, that's the rub, right? It's like, how conservative do you want to be? We could have said, well, yeah, we're going to need 50 more patrol officers. Well, if we had 50 more patrol officers, we would have enough capacity. We would have more than enough capacity, so you don't say 50. We said, well, 3, 5 is probably a conservative estimate, but that's going to be too expensive. Let's say 3. And turns out that maybe, and I don't even know if those were the numbers, but that's a kind of a process. Well, it turns out that no, 5 was the right number, but we only hired 3. Well, now we're struggling. And I don't think it's from lack of planning. It's from, hey, when you finally do it, and then you get to, the planning becomes the reality, you're going to find out exactly, And maybe it's because we didn't anticipate the point being as successful as it is, and that, that's win-win till you lose, I guess. I don't know. So.
Or it's just the course of a town's life. I mean,
It ebbs and flows.
Not everything has to be a net financial win, right? We should do things that are benefits to our community that cost money. If we're not spending money to benefit our community, what the hell are we spending it on?
Yeah, but Mike's got a good point too, though. It's not just money. There's impacts on people resources and impacts on quality of life and other measurements that aren't dollar. Well, you can quantify them in dollars if you want to, but they're not tax money that goes in, comes in and goes out as an invoice and accounts payable. So.
But I do think, at risk of me trying to have the last word here.
Oh, you won't.
One of the pieces that we have not done a good job accounting for is the incremental costs on staff time. If it makes Marin's job 10% more difficult, well, or now we need 1.1 people in the planning department. Well, we're not getting 1.1. Either something's going to fall off the plate, or has happened in the last couple of years. Marin picks up the slack, and gets stuck with more responsibilities until that reaches a fundamental breaking point. So therein lies my point, that as we push these things forward as an implementation committee, what we, I think, need to be acutely aware of is that our models are always imperfect, and that's a known reality. But what are the additional burdens we're putting on our staff time, and is that going to be worth it to the community? What is the opportunity cost of that?
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to add that based on the conversation that we had earlier about the templates and identifying sort of a status update, if you will, on where we are with the different strategies. When these issues come up related to dollars and the trade-offs have had to be made, I would actually advocate that we use that as an identifying as an important identifier as to why perhaps progress hasn't been
That's a good
to the,
point.
to the degree that we would want it, or that why this particular piece hasn't been able to get started, so that people can hopefully start to digest the fact that there are trade-offs, and we did want to do X as a town instead of doing Y, and so that's why we don't have the funds to do this. So I know it's a lot to communicate, but I just wanted to put that out there. That
No, I think it's a
that's
great point, because if we don't document it, then we lose the institutional reference points, and that's what creates a lot of times frustration with the public. I
Right.
say, well, it was so obvious, why didn't you do it? It's like, well, if it was that obvious, we would have done it. Here's why we didn't do it, wrote it
Right,
down.
right, exactly.
Right? And I've said this at many school committee meetings, it's worthwhile going through the process, even if we decide not to make the change, at least we know why we didn't. We've explicitly identified why we decided not to do that, change something.
Yep.
And that's as important as knowing, as actually doing something. So I think that's a great point. And that should be part of the stuff that we're trying to do. Is, you know, but I think a lot of that is, at this point, conceptual, because I don't think we've gotten anywhere near far enough down the road to be able to make those kinds of final determinations, you know, because we're only, 18 months into having this on our in front of us. But I think it's a great point.
Okay, so it seems as if the action that we could possibly take on this issue, short of sending continuing to send our members to individual meetings and committees to, as it were, give them some direction, some sense. However, our next step would strike me is, at the very least, we should be providing some, shall we say, very clear input to certain committees to provide what we'll call guidance. Is there a sense that that's what we should be doing in any event? Continue to do that? And how do we improve that? Should the content be, I'm trying to, as it were, this should be an ongoing process in addition to the cuts that you and Chase are doing. So what I'm interested in doing is, for example, and I want to pick on the Economic Development Committee first, just because they're there, okay, is anything else, and they have a title. Is there anything to be gained by enlisting them more firmly and give them some specific, shall we say, ways to start thinking about their role, other than being, from my characterization, somewhat passive? I mean, you objected, I think, a little bit.
Well, I mean, I think that it's reasonable to ask to meet with them and say, this is what we want to talk about. There are things in here that have your name on them. Can you tell us where you're at with that? And then we get a response, and the response might be, well, we made this progress. We haven't talked about this one yet, but it's on our agenda, or our goals to get to during this fiscal year. Or that one, nope, we decided for these reasons that's never going to happen, at least not in the near term.
That might be the most important feedback that we.
Right, and again, what I would argue is that once we have that information, that it's written down and presented in a living document, so that the next generation can go back and say, well, where are we at with it? Oh, here it is. It's on, January of 2019, they talked about it, and then they had an update in April of 2019. It looks like it went dormant till, March of 20, and it's just an ongoing transactional audit of that particular issue with that particular board. I think that'd be very worthwhile.
Well, when you visited the Economic Development Committee, did you get, I remember your report, I have your report. Do you recall them being, as it were, engaged in anything having directly to do or indirectly to do with master plan?
Housing, it was all about housing that night.
Okay, that night. But I'm talking about what they were doing. Housing was coming in from the outside. Okay, so the answer appears to be, we don't know. Okay.
Well, as I understand it, the EDC in particular has stated that they take their direction from the Board of Selectmen.
Thank you. Spot ready to cast that. But all we're doing is providing guidance, we're providing guidance from the master plan, not taking the role, it's not the role for us to give them their marching orders.
Right. I agree,
Okay.
100%.
So, the only thing I would look to for the Board of Selectmen on this would be some support. In other words, yeah, we want you to encourage them to start thinking about the stuff on the fold-outs and coming up
What
with
if,
specific-
whether it comes from the Master Plan Implementation Committee, or I would be happy to take this to the Board of Selectmen, and perhaps it's better coming from the Board of Selectmen. What if we contact each of our boards, committees, commissions, et cetera, say, here's the list of things that we said we would accomplish collectively as a town. Would you mind at your next meeting to schedule 20 minutes to discuss what you've done with respect to the master plan, what you expect to do, where it fits in, really just give us, and send us a quick note. It doesn't have to be a long thing, just a quick note telling us where you stand, what you think is important to you. So that way, rather than going to the, let's say, the Economic Development Committee, and they've got housing stuff on their agenda for tonight, right? Things, ebb and flow is the theme, right? So things ebb and flow. We're not getting a snapshot, but we're actually asking them to look at all of the things, look at all of those goals, and just tell us
Yeah.
more broadly where they stand.
This may predate you, but that was an instruction given to all the committees upon conclusion of when the master plan was, adopted by the town. That was the.
Do we have any indication that anyone's actually done that?
The planning board does it routinely, and as far as, yeah, I'm sorry, and the historic committee.
Well, we have sort of done this. I mean, we did, again, in the course of the first year that we were in existence, members of the MPIC visited, we each were given our sort of group of committees that we should visit, and we went to them, and we talked to them and asked them what they were doing, and sometimes we got good answers, and sometimes maybe they weren't doing that much. I mean, in some cases, you could see problems, and maybe that's something we should work on more. I mean, this goes back to some of the things that we talked about in our last
Sure. It
discussion.
fell off precipitously, except for the few because of the nature, I think, of some of the projects, quite frankly.
The reason I ask that too is because, well, first and foremost, I owe Nina and Anthony my goals matrix for the year. It's only a day late so far. But in my experience on the Board of Selectmen and the CONSCOM, they're very different senses of where they fit into the community as a whole, right? CONSCOM is really just trying to get through the projects in front of them, and they don't often have the time to look up and take it in a
Yep.
little bit. And
That
I
was
think
my
other
sense
boards and
when I
committees
visited
suffer
that.
that as
Oh,
as
a
well.
lot of them do. I agree with you. This is one of my concerns about coming at them with the same stick all the way across. I mean, there are a select few that I think should respond, but there are a lot that are unable. I mean,
Maybe there's another approach kind of in between. What if, and it does take committee time, committee member time, but some of the folks obviously know each other, but even if it's just coffee, coffee at Littleton Cafe one morning, tell me where you guys are on all these things, jot down a few notes, and, that's the extent of understanding, and then bringing it all back. Because I think that every group is going to have their own dynamic, and every group is going to have their own relationships that already exist. So if I already know somebody on a particular committee, it's going to be a lot easier to get that information.
I think that there are any number of ways to gather the information and get the update. I think the bigger thing that we need to decide is, what are we going to do with that information once we have it? How are we going to make it have value? Because if we have to just constantly remind ourselves, well, Jonathan, what happened the last time you talked to those guys? Oh, well, it was this. It's like, well, that's not really, we're not using that information to any value. And again, I think if we codify it and formalize it into some kind of documentation that can be referred to by ourselves and then the next generation moving forward, and I think if we formalize the presentation of that material both to the particular boards and the public, I think then it becomes an expectation. Oh yeah, it's coming around to that time of year where that MPIC guy is going to be knocking on the door. Let's get ready, and we know what it's going to be. It's not going to be terrible and like an inquisition, but we do have to be prepared. That's part of our charter. And if we don't, the selectmen are going to get on our butts about it because we report to them. And then I think we'll be good to go.
Now, let me pick up on Chase's suggestion and see if that's a good place for us to start. Is it unreasonable to see if the Board of Selectmen can communicate with the boards? Again, use the EDC as an example, and ask them, in the way you usually do, to look at the master plan and pick out the items where they are, and then basically begin formulating an action plan that fits their role? Or do you think that that's too far?
I think an action plan is probably a little much. I think the most effective piece right now would really, frankly, be in some boards and committees, simply to remind them that the master plan exists. But have them go through the exercise of looking at, oh yeah, what are those 67 goals? Oh yeah, I forgot, look at that. Here are some things that the town has articulated, and simply have them revisit those. I guess I trust our boards and committees to look at that and move those forward effectively. I don't think asking them, especially telling them, to take CONSCOM, for example. Okay, you usually end your meeting at 10 o'clock. I now want you to end your meeting at 10:30 because you're now going to do this additional thing, is going to be productive to us. But a gentle reminder, a more formal nudge, hey, take a look at this, followed up by what Anna suggested of, hey, how the informal, how can we help you? What resources can we help you marshal to accomplish what might be the top 2 priorities that you, board or commission, have oversight onto? But the first step is awareness. Look at it again. It's there.
Well, it sounds to me like the instruction you're providing here, and I can certainly start the process, and I think others here can do it as well, is getting in touch with various boards and asking them to take a fresh look or another look at the master plan, because that's what was done in the first months of our operation.
The context of that, too, to Mike's point about the deliverable, what do we do with that information is, I would like to think those of us in this room have a decent idea of what's going on, but to the extent that there are things moving forward that we're unaware of, part of the ask is, hey, tell us what progress you've made on these things, because we want to aggregate that information and tell the community what we're doing as a community to address.
I mean, you're talking about the stuff that's mentioned explicitly in the plan.
This
Okay.
stuff that's mentioned explicitly in the plan, and so then it's what we're asking the board. It's not just an edict.
Yeah.
A board or commission
No,
do this.
Yeah.
Tell us.
Okay.
We want to recognize the hard work that you've done.
Okay. I will undertake that, and I guess, since you're a consensus builder, I've appointed you to work with me. All right, Lyle?
You're on.
Okay, thank you.
And maybe, Nina, I'll talk
Yeah.
to Joe, but maybe we could schedule a couple of minutes on Monday night to just sort of brief the Board of Selectmen on sort of where the implementation committee is going, and reporting to the community, as well as touching base with
Yeah.
boards and committees and whatnot.
Yeah. I try to go to the BOS meetings and raise help. So I mean,
Yeah, and I would say that absolutely we can add it if Joe would like to do that, and I think my understanding is any board member can add. We do have a rich agenda drafted
yeah, that's
for
true.
Monday night, but I think a few minutes by the board member as an update would be probably perfectly fine.
Yeah, I'll touch base with Joe, but we'll tell him around.
thanks a
5
lot,
minutes.
Chase. I appreciate it. Great, thank you. All right. As far as goal setting, I think our cup runneth over. I think we've got some good goals here that'll keep us more than occupied going forward. All right, organization. Maybe I should have done this at the very beginning, but I wanted to make sure that you were on board. But do we want to change? I'm going to just throw it out. Do we want to change how we're organized?
Well, I think we need to we got potentially, we know we have one new member coming on and potentially two. I
Two,
would wait
right.
till we
Yeah.
get some definitive
Okay.
answers on that before we're worried about that.
Okay, fair enough. We can wait till the next time. Public input, you're not public, but please, I mean, you can cut right into any of the topics that you've arrived early.
Well, I'm certainly not shy, so that won't be an issue, and I'm glad to participate, but I really am learning a lot at this stage, and quite frankly, I need a little bit of time to get up to speed before I can provide substantive input to some of these discussions. So this has been very helpful to me, and it's good for me to hear this discussion, but at this point, I don't really have material comments.
Okay. Have you ever been around when a master plan was actually implemented?
No, certainly, have been part of master plan execution, but I've not been in a community where there's been a master plan implementation committee and have not been a part of drafting master plans. Predominantly, they've been in place, and the community has taken steps towards progress towards those master plans.
So they carry out the plan, but don't use a committee. That's the difference. That's what you've seen.
Well, and I think that from what I have seen, and that's a small snapshot, very, very small snapshot of the Commonwealth, saying it at best, not even materially significant. I think that often communities, based on, and you've said it tonight, the committee said it tonight, it's often difficult to manage implementing a master plan because of the limited resources and perhaps not having a body such as yourselves who is actively participating and reviewing and analyzing how to make steps towards the solutions of what's been identified in the master plan. So I don't have examples of communities that are doing it better. I don't truly know how we're doing it, so I'm still learning that. Not sure if I've answered your question, but I
I'm looking
think...
for tips.
Ah.
I'm looking, the implementation committee is not the be-all, end-all. I mean,
Sure.
if a board of selectmen or a planning board or any board in town with a statutory authority, we don't have statutory authority, obviously, has been able to achieve some degree of success in getting a master plan to actually come alive and come off the shelf and come alive.
Mhm.
I think all of us here would like to know, what did they do? Even, lessons learned, because I've got a file this much lessons learned, and I think there's still a lot of stuff churning. I mean, we're only a few years into it.
I think as I would offer any task, anything that anyone wished to complete, I believe, 57 items, 67 items on
There's
this list?
60s, yeah.
60s.
And I heard Anna at one point say, is our priority, sounds like you may have created a priority list.
Oh, yes.
And so, and that priority may be different than perhaps what's listed in here, because there's high, medium, and low priorities in the master plan itself. I think as with anything, it has to be prioritization of what needs to be done, and then focusing on those priorities instead of trying to be so wide that you don't have the resources to do that. And perhaps if you do have priorities, when you do speak with the different committees, you should focus on those top 15, top 10, whatever the number may be.
We started
instead of-
with 7.
Even better.
Yeah, no, we started with 7. We pretty well followed the line that you're describing here, so, okay.
And those are just all good practices in how you would try to address such a large subject.
Okay. Well then, thank you very much. Minutes.
There were four sets of minutes, starting back to October 3rd of last year.
Oh, so I have the January 15th, okay,
So they have- yeah, so these are,
Yeah, I have the online version.
okay, great.
okay.
I read them.
To the electronic ones.
Okay.
Oh, I read it. Got it again.
Are there any corrections, additions, deletions, embarrassments?
I read and I was fine with them.
If there are no, all right, let's start off, I think we should do these, I guess, in order officially.
It's up to you.
I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes from October 23rd, 2018.
I hear a motion, no further discussion. Is there?
Oh, you need a second.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
I'm going to abstain on that one because I wasn't there.
Can still vote.
Okay. Aye. All right. I make a motion that we approve the minutes from December 11th of 2018.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Second.
No further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Make a motion that we approve the minutes from January 15th of 2019.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
I hear a second. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 I make a motion that we approve the minutes from April 9th, 2019.
Second.
I hear a second. No further discussion necessary. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And I abstain on that one since I was absent.
I believe that completes the cycle. I think we can now move to just an announcement, a clear announcement of our next meeting, please. Maren?
That's why I sent you the draft. I have no idea.
Okay, all right. It is, all right, right along with me now. Why did I not include it in my fast file? I know where it is. Sorry. All right, while I'm here, I just want to let you know that I've extended an invitation to Nick Lawler to see if he'll come in and give us a background discussion on the resources, natural resource, obviously water, both its quality and quantity for the town going forward, in view of the change and also population dynamics. That group apparently is very aware, for obvious reasons, of what's going on with that resource. So I thought it was
Who's
this. This is Nick Lawler. He is I believe, the manager of the Littleton Water Department. And
I
they're
would
ver-
expect he would probably bring Corey Godfrey with him, their
Yeah.
environmental analyst.
They're very good at, as it were, tracking and understanding where things are and the technologies that needed to be addressed them. So it's a good place for us to get a handle on, we're changing and growing in certain ways. You know, what does it mean in terms of resource, a vital resource? Okay. Mpic's next meeting is July the 16th, a Tuesday. So that's our next meeting.
I do have a couple other quick announcements, things
Please.
that may be interesting to Mpic. First, with respect to, because it comes to bear on the common, certainly I don't think anyone's unaware of the fact that we've got a couple recreational marijuana applicants in front of the Board of Selectmen for host community agreements. One of those applicants is within the common. And so if you haven't looked at it, the applicant made a presentation to the Board of Selectmen mid-May or so.
May 20th?
May 20th, that sounds right. So definitely take a look at that. My understanding is there are a couple of additional applicants, so we're looking at least 4 applicants for licenses from the Board of Selectmen or enter into negotiations for a host community agreement. Then they come visit Anna for a license and permanent.
Just Anna, right?
Just Anna.
Good, okay, good.
Are there,
Are there that many available licenses?
There,
You.
the town can grant up to 2.
oh, so there'll be a choice.
And there's criteria, you know, I think at some point, the town has voted repeatedly to authorize these, so we would be probably on risky legal territory to simply say no because we just didn't like them. But if we said no to each applicant based on specific criteria, you know, looking at each of their applications, we've got detailed criteria to look at. So there's a lot going on there, and it certainly comes to bear on the common.
Or it
It's
could.
there.
It could.
Well, right, but the concerns of the public, I think, are interesting as they relate to the common as a whole. Whether it's a recreational marijuana shop or other increased uses that could increase traffic flow. I mean, you might argue that this will have more traffic flow than other applications, but nonetheless, there's a lot of attention there. The other thing that I wanted to let people know is that last Board of Selectmen meeting, we were approached by a representative of the owner of 119 Tehadawon. It's 20,
Piece of land.
25 or so acre
Acres.
parcel
Mhm.
on Tehadawon Road, interested in potentially negotiating with the town to acquire that property. It's not currently, there's no bona fide offer. It's not in any formal legal proceeding yet. Although I believe there's, is it 61A? Do you know?
I don't think, I thought it was not, but maybe.
Anyway,
Yeah.
so with respect to land use, open space, all of those things, the town is going to start to wrestle with that in the Board of Selectmen.
Mhm.
Paul and I are going to look at it and pull somebody in from CONSCOM and start to understand what might or might not benefit the town if we were to acquire it. The number that was tossed around at the Board of Selectmen meeting was 1.1?
It was definitely in the millions.
1.1-ish.
What is it, 119?
Yeah, I think it's 119.
And
Very
it's close
probably.
by, some, I remember the map, I'm trying to remember, it's close by some existing.
Yeah, it actually connects Harwood and Tehadawon.
Geez, that might be across the street, in between where my house is.
Does I was really surprised, because, I mean, I guess
Pretty
I haven't been
close.
following these things, or maybe the papers haven't been covering them. I was really surprised to get this notice of a special town meeting. Does that have anything that would be relevant to us? I was puzzled about what it was all about. but-
I would suggest it probably doesn't have anything that's in the purview of the Master Plan Implementation Committee. It's very much a policy level consideration. There was a citizens petition that was brought forward, despite the town's best efforts to encourage the petitioner to come forward and bring it in line with either last fall's town meeting or the spring's town meeting. They chose otherwise, and so have brought it forward sort of out of cycle, but they produced the requisite number of signatures, and so we're holding the town meeting to bring it forward. Parks and Rec, rather than me try and butcher it, or frankly give you maybe a particularly biased perspective on it, I would encourage you to take a look at, the Board of Selectmen held a hearing on it. Parks and Rec, I think last week held a hearing.
No,
on
last
it.
night.
Was it last night?
They had to cancel that last week. meeting.
Oh, was it? Okay. And can give you probably a more balanced analysis of it than I can.
Roughly speaking, it's a potential change to the town bylaws regarding how the town allocates field and building use to groups that might want to use it for recreational and community education purposes.
The Board of Selectmen voted unanimously not to support it.
As did the school committee, and as did the Park and Rec Commission, and as did the Conservation Commission. I think those are the only four that voted
That's my
on it.
understanding. And for Tehadawon.
So-
What's it all about? I still don't understand what it's
Yeah,
about.
if Jonathan, after the meeting's over, I'm happy to talk to you.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Just getting back to Tehadawon, I think it's not, I'm just looking at the agenda, it's 19 Tehadawon.
Oh, did I?
19 to add.
19 to have one.
That's a horse of a different color.
That's it for you know, updates on things that.
Fantastic, thank you for the,
Well, and real quick on the planning board, the form-based code, next meeting is going to be on July 25th, and one of the requests that we have is that if anyone knows of architects and engineers who can help to come to this meeting and learn more about what's going to be proposed for the zoning in the common, that would really be terrific. So neighbors, friends.
Are we anticipating potential bylaw changes at the fall town meeting regarding form-based code?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
The proposal, if I remember rightly, the sort of thing is that this will be a informational meeting, I think they said, and then there'll be a hearing sometime in
In September.
September,
Yeah.
before the town meeting and
Exactly.
the
Good
mandatory
listening,
hearing.
Jonathan. Good listening, thank you.
Well, I went to that meeting, so I
Yes.
sort of remembered.
no, you guys are, Is the purpose of having the engineers and architects invited in is to help write the code, as it were, or to be able to track, to articulate it to the town, or what would be the idea behind it? I mean, it's.
So
I
I
understand some-
think from the standpoint that they would be the folks who would be utilizing it, so in a way, come in, take a look, tell us where you see any gaps, any red flags, what do you like about it? Is that?
Right, especially architects and engineers that are used to working with the existing bylaws and hopefully point out some of the benefits.
Right, exactly.
Help us understand in specific lots, would it cause a problem?
Test run it without actually test running, yeah. So that would be great. And then, if anyone missed the May 16th and you want to watch the first one, it's on LCTV and the PowerPoint presentation is available online. And then the other planning board project has been the train station area. Do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, just survey number 3 is up, linked to the front page of the town website and to the planning board page.
What's the deadline on that one?
That'll be out for 2 weeks, so it just went up Friday, so June 26th, I think, was what I, 28th? Yeah, thank you.
Then also to promote Maureen's work, she submitted another grant to the EEA for work related to the open space and how perhaps we could take a look at that with TDR. And so when are we looking to hear back on that?
My guess was 6 to 8 weeks from when it was submitted, so, 6 weeks or so.
Okay, great.
Does this overlap in any way with the other initiative that we started, the modest one we started with?
There's certainly be a lot of synergy.
Okay.
That's the plan.
No, good. I mean, this is,
Yep.
no, the town allocated about $12,000 for a analysis. Basically, to bring together all the studies that have been done on land use so far and try to bring some coherence to the idea of bringing the concepts of development and preservation and establishment of open space together rather than keeping them separate all the time. In other words, have sort of an overall design philosophy. Okay, hearing no, do I hear a
Move to
motion?
adjourn?
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much for, I think, a reasonably productive evening. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
So there's an MOU between